Hi, Dr. Jenny Goodman. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to be with you, Amelia.
So, getting straight into it, you trained as a doctor and you went to medical school, and then one day realized that that wasn't at all actually what you were looking for, that you didn't feel completely identified with that world. Can you explain what happened? What was that moment when you realized after all these years of study, it wasn't what you wanted?
Well, actually, it was much sooner than that. It was probably within the first year or two of medical school, I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. But it was at the beginning of the third year where you've learned all the basic science. You've learned the anatomy, the physiology, the biochemistry, the microbiology, pathology, and so on. And then at the beginning of the third year, it's meant to be clinical studies. So for me, that would be 1978, 79. Now we're going to meet real patients and start to learn the arts of healing. And we'll understand what all the anatomy, physiology, and biochemistry was for. And that was really the moment of crashing disillusion. Those first few weeks on the wards in the so-called clinical part, the last 3 years of the training is clinical. And not only were they not applying the physiology and the biochemistry that we'd learnt, but they weren't trying to make people better. Like on the wards, the word healing was taboo. The word cure was taboo. What they talked about was managing symptoms or managing patients. And what it meant effectively was suppressing the symptoms with drugs. Then when you get side effects, you get other drugs to deal with those side effects. And nobody went home well. Nobody went home healthy. Now, the World Health Organization says health is a state of complete mental, physical, spiritual well-being. It's not just that they never achieved that, it's that they weren't even aiming for it, and they would have been very embarrassed if you mentioned it. There was also no attempt to look at root causes. So I would say, why has this young man of 40 had a heart attack? Why is this, woman of 45 got liver cancer? Why? And not only did they not have answers, the question itself was taboo. You get on with managing symptoms. And it's very sad because the root purpose of medicine, which we were taught, was to cure sometimes, to relieve often, and to comfort always. I saw no cure and no comfort, but the middle one, relief, I certainly saw temporary relief provided by drugs, but you always ended up with further pathology and you stayed in the system and you had to be treated. Nobody actually got well, and partly this was because nobody got to the hospital till they'd really been getting iller and iller for a decade. No early intervention, there's no prevention. There was nothing about how to stay healthy as a human being. Now I'm articulating it now. I didn't have it that clear, at the age of 21, but I knew something was missing. I didn't know what it was. So yes, I worked as a junior doctor for a while, and I worked in A&E for a while. That's casualty, as it was called then, emergency medicine. And that I liked because I didn't disagree with what was happening. Conventional medicine is brilliant at emergencies. You break a bone, you have a heart attack. In that moment, that is what you need. Right now, there are reasons why people have heart attacks. There's loads of prevention that's possible. But in that emergency moment, I felt I was doing the right thing, stitching up wounds and so on.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a conflict with that, but I didn't want to go on doing that forever. So in the end, I left and I didn't know what I was going to do. I had not really discovered holistic medicine. But what I ended up doing was teaching medical sciences to practitioners and students of alternative medicine. So in colleges where they were training herbalists, homeopaths, osteopaths, acupuncturists, and so on. And of course, in doing that, I discovered loads of alternative forms of medicine. None of them pulled me, herbalism does. But the others didn't pull me because herbalism is real medicine. I was still very attached to the science that I'd learned, and particularly to the biochemistry. And so I was doing that. I was also teaching in adult education to ordinary people, demystifying medicine, translating what their GP had told them, teaching about women's health, politics of health, what is alternative medicine, and so on. And then I was very, very lucky to discover the British Society for Ecological Medicine. These were the doctors doing the kind of medicine I had imagined as a 19-year-old I was going to learn in medical school. They were getting to the root causes, they were making people better, and they were not making them worse. So this was in the late 90s. So, 17 years really after I'd qualified. I'd been in the wilderness. And I'm still a very enthusiastic member of the British Society for Ecological Medicine. And basically what these doctors are doing is learning in great depth about nutrition. That's the good stuff that's missing from our bodies, why it's missing, and how to put it back. Why it's missing is a lot to do with farming. And the other half is environmental medicine. What industrial toxins have got into our bodies from, the toxic world we've created since the Industrial Revolution 2,500 years ago. And that also obviously deeply connects with farming, but there are many other sources of pollution as well. So this was wildly exciting. And I was very lucky. I found them as they were starting their first 2-year postgrad diploma. And I studied ferociously. And I set up a practice. And I never looked back, really. This, as I say, was the kind of medicine I thought I'd be learning. One of the fascinating things about it was, at the end of the first year of medical school, I asked one of the lecturers, what's the biochemistry for? I liked biochemistry, learning about the molecules within the body, how they transform into other things, and fascinating, but I couldn't see the clinical relevance. And he said, and this was one of the many lies I was taught in medical school, he said, oh, it's not really relevant unless you want to go into obscure genetic medicine and learn about metabolic illnesses of children. And that is so rubbish, because the minute I discovered the British Society for Ecological Medicine, boy, did I need to go and dig out those old biochemistry books and revise, because nutrition is applied biochemistry and environmental medicine is applied biochemistry. It's the substances we're missing and the toxic substances we've taken on board, which are precisely the problem. And detoxing them and putting the good stuff back in is all about biochemistry. So they taught us the biochemistry, but they didn't know what it's for. And I speak to a lot of young medical students these days, like 50 years later, it has hardly changed. They don't know what the biochemistry is for.
Yeah.
But so could you walk us through what ecological medicine is exactly?
So as I say, it has two halves: nutrition, putting the missing good stuff back in, figuring out why it's missing, and environmental medicine, taking the environmental toxins out of us and teaching people how to avoid them in the future. But those are two halves of the same coin. The reason it's ecological is twofold. First of all, we see the whole body as one joined up ecosystem. The body is an ecosystem, whereas in conventional medicine, if you go to your GP and you say, oh, I've got a pain in these joints and I've got a rash all over me and I'm struggling to breathe, they will send you respectively to the rheumatologist, the dermatologist, and the respiratory physician. And those three people have no way of connecting with each other, right? Because it's all in silos. It's analysed, it's split, it's divided. And actually the body is a whole, it's an ecosystem. So firstly, we would look at what is causing this inflammation to manifest in these three different systems of the body. Now, which system a problem manifests in is largely down to our genetic tendencies, but the fact that it manifests at all is to do with the environmental toxins and the nutritional deficits. So it's ecological in that sense, but it's also ecological medicine in a more profound and broader sense, which is it sees the human body not only as an ecosystem, but as part of the ecosystem, which is planet Earth, from which we know we cannot separate ourselves. And this is not like wifty new age stuff. This is absolute biology, physics, and chemistry. We are part of the Earth. Whatever we put into the air, we inhale. Whatever we put into the water, we drink. And whatever we put into the soil is taken up by the plants. It's in the crops, it's on the plate, it's in our bodies, it's in our gut, messing with our microbiome. So there is no separation. So it sees us as part of our Mother Earth, the ecosystem. And obviously, we can't poison the planet without poisoning the people. What my books are about is how to unpoison, how to stop doing both.
Yeah.
So, I really don't like to see health workers, even the holistic ones, in one silo, and farmers, even the organic ones, in another silo. we are absolutely fighting the same battle to get back to nature, to treasuring nature and working with nature, as opposed to using synthetic chemicals, which are antagonistic to nature.
Yeah, because I've definitely seen and heard you say that farmers are the ones who actually hold the keys to the public health solutions that we need.
Absolutely. Yes. So if the farmers, and this is all down to government policy and economics, because I mean, everywhere I go, the farmers are desperate to convert to organic and regenerative. There's no ideological problem. There's an economic problem just of making the transition. Once they've made it, they save money because they're not splashing out on toxic pesticides and fertilizers. But government needs to be subsidizing the transition to small scale, human scale, organic, regenerative family farms, as opposed to subsidizing, agribusiness, which is the monocrop chemical industrial agriculture, which is devastating our country, it's devastating our health. You get vast fields of nothing but wheat plus glyphosate.
Yeah.
And the kids are eating daily bread, which is poisoning them. And you get vast fields now of something called oilseed rape, which used to be used only for making candles. And now they've decided it's fit for human consumption. It isn't. And it's absolutely full of chemicals in the processing as well as in the growing. That's giving the whole country hay fever. And it's, all that land is being completely depleted of its nutrients, right? So it needs to be divided up into small holdings with a few animals, lots of different plants, trees, plants and animals together. So the animals fertilize the soil.
Yeah.
And that is, of course, is helping climate change because it's putting the carbon and the nitrogen back into the soil. If you have a vast diversity of crops growing together, which I've seen in action many times, you don't really need the pesticides because the sheer variety suppresses the bugs.
Yeah.
If you have crop cover, right, so you don't have any bare earth, then the floods and the storms and the droughts are not going to wash away your soil. So you don't need to dig, you just need to keep always what Rebecca Hosking calls the green duvet on the earth, right? The grass growing.
Yeah.
You need animals, as David Attenborough said, if grasslands are to be rich and varied and productive, they have to be grazed, as they have been by herds of wild animals in nature for millions, not thousands, millions of years.
Yeah.
Obviously, we don't want hideous industrial scale meat production. It's cruel, it's wicked, it's devastating to the animals, the planet, and anybody who eats that, cruelty infested meat. But we need the odd cow, sheep and chicken and pig dotted about, mixed in with a huge variety of arable crops and trees. And it's perfectly possible. And, if you've got a pest, you find out which animal eats that pest and you introduce that animal.
Yeah.
And the Pesticide Action Network are doing this all over. Right? Whereas if you use the pesticides, what happens is you poison all the good microbes in the soil, the bacteria whose job is to get the nitrogen into the roots of the plants, and the fungi whose job is to get the minerals into the roots of the plants. You poison them. So not only are your crops poisoned, they're nutritionally depleted. The synthetic fertilizers drain all the nutrients out of the soil. And the pesticides then kill the good bacteria in our own gut when we're eating them. So if you have biodiversity in the soil, you have biodiversity in the gut. We're all taking probiotics because we've lost the good bugs in our gut. Now, it's partly because our food is poisoned with pesticides. There are other reasons. It's too much sugar, it's antibiotics, it's the contraceptive pill, it's hormone replacement. Those all damage the balance of the gut microbiome. But we start with farming. And if farmers were enabled to grow loads of different vegetables and a little bit of, wheat, rye, oats, barley, those things, but not vast acres of nothing but, it would be so much better for the earth and for us.
Yeah.
One of the other problems with monocrop farming is if you're growing a whole field of nothing but X, the pest that likes to eat X is going to say to itself, well, it's Christmas.
It's a free birthday.
Exactly. It's going to invite all its friends and relatives. That crop will be devastated. Therefore, you use pesticide. Then, of course, the bug gets immune to the pesticide. It gets resistant, just like our bacteria do to antibiotics. So you add more and more. and you have a cascade of intervention, which is catastrophic. And organic and regenerative farming is the way out of this. And whenever people are economically facilitated to do it, or they just take the plunge and risk the poverty anyway for a couple of years, their health gets better. The health of everyone who is eating those crops gets better because they're using compost instead of fertilizers. So they're putting all the nutrients back into the soil so that the broccoli I get is not only safe and unpoisoned, it's also much richer in the calcium, magnesium, the iodine, all the minerals that we need. The synthetic fertilizers don't have the minerals that we need. They just have nitrogen, phosphorus, and occasional potassium. In 26 years of practice, I never found anyone deficient in those. What I find people desperately deficient in is the magnesium, the iodine, the chromium, the manganese, and the zinc. And none of those are in synthetic fertilizers, and all of those are in natural homemade compost and manure that you put back into the soil. So, we've been doing this for 10,000 years. We've only been doing it chemically for a few decades. And we need to go back, even though the word back is not popular. We need to reclaim the wisdom of the past, and we can use, modern biochemistry as well. Like all the wonderful research into biological pest control using the bug that eats the pests. So it's perfectly possible. And what I see in the clinic, when people change to eating organically grown food, their health transforms. So they only need supplements at the beginning, right? And after a few months of eating organic food, they don't need the supplements anymore because they're getting the nourishment from their food as we always used to.
And so is that the sort of first tip that you would give anyone that comes in for a consultation with you? Because I think we also hear a lot that, organic food isn't necessarily affordable to everyone. So what, in your opinion, what's sort of the best tip that you would give that has the biggest benefit for the euro spent or for the pound spent?
Yeah, definitely eating organic. And I need to answer the very valid criticism of, it's a middle class luxury, it's too expensive. Firstly, it is more expensive than it should be by a long way, even though it has no synthetic expensive inputs. The point is that mass-produced cheap crap food that is full of pesticides and toxic herbicides like glyphosate and no nutrients, it's subsidized effectively because that method of farming produces a huge environmental impact, which the water companies, fail to clean up, the government fails to clean up, but there are cleanup attempts, but we are not charged the cost of those cleanup attempts. The food is ridiculously cheap. So if we were charged the real cost, including the cost to the planet, of synthetic crap, rubbish food, it would work out far more expensive than organic food. In a true sense, it's more expensive. Okay, so that doesn't affect your pocket, but it means it's a campaigning issue. And there are charities in parts of London that have got organic and regenerative food to farmers' markets in the poorest areas so that, poor people can have really good, fresh, local organic produce, which is what they need. It's what their kids need to be able to think straight in school. So it is perfectly possible politically to make organic food much more available and much cheaper than rubbish food, right? Second thing the government needs to do is to basically tax the junk food industry out of existence, because those vast acres of wheat and oilseed rape are going to make the rubbish food that is dumbing down the kids and making everybody ill. Right? And that needs to be taxed out of existence, and they need to teach the kids to grow food and cook. Right? We need cookery, not food tech, cookery and gardening in schools, horticulture, GCSE, cookery for everyone. And they need to not have people coming in and cooking their foods. They need to have a rota where they take turns to pick the herbs and pick the veg from the school garden and make meals. That would be transformative. But back to the real everyday problem. Okay, organic's still more expensive. Here's something I would say to patients. How often do you eat chicken? 3 times a week. Okay, Switch to organic free-range chicken and only eat it once a week. Because you don't need it 3 times a week. Once a week will do. So one organic chicken once a week is still cheaper than 3 cruelty-infested, junk, nutritionally void, tormented battery chickens 3 times a week. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it is health insurance. And it's much cheaper than the health insurance you pay for that's called health insurance. So think of it as your health insurance. It is preventive medicine. And I have to say, getting cancer is very, very expensive. It's expensive because you can't work when you're ill. So you can't put a price on your health.
Yeah, absolutely. So because we saw in our study that around 84% of all Europeans have at least 2 or 3 different types of pesticides in their system at any given time. But what exactly does that mean inside of our body?
Yes, we have loads of ways of detoxifying them. So I'll just mention that first.
Yeah.
First thing is simply eating organic, because then you stop taking them in. Second thing, and my first book concludes with a chapter about detox and 7 basic methods of getting these things out of your system. The first one is high dose vitamin C. The second one is juicing, organic vegetable juicing. Very, very important, quite easy to do. Use mostly green vegetables, not too much in the way of carrot and beetroot because it's too sweet, gives you a sugar hit, and no fruit. But organic vegetable juicing will clear it. Third thing is Epsom salts baths, because the magnesium and the sulfate help the detox pathways. Fourth thing is saunas. Saunas done in a very particular way. And this is important because pesticides are fat-soluble toxins. And remind me in a minute, I'll explain exactly what they do in the body and why they're so lethal and what diseases they contribute to. They are fat-soluble, which means that they are in the fat in the body, and there is a layer of fat just under the skin. When you get in a hot sauna, the toxins come out only for the first 5 minutes, right? After that, you're just losing good minerals. So what I advocate is if someone's really ill with pesticide poisoning, sauna 3 times a week, but only for 5 minutes, okay? And you're continually wiping off the sweat, right? You're not just sitting there and sweating. So, cycling in the heat from London to Brighton won't do it because the body will just reabsorb the sweat and all the toxins in it. So you're sitting in the sauna with a clean, dry towel, wipe the sweat off, drop the towel in the laundry and go and have a shower. So that's really important. And then there's specific supplements for getting rid of specific toxins. And for pesticides, it's phosphatidylcholine, and that's in egg yolk. Right, so eggs have been demonized, but egg yolk is the richest food source of phosphatidylcholine. You can also take it as a supplement. Unfortunately, it's expensive. There's glutathione, which helps all our detox pathways. As I've said, there's vitamin C, vegetable juicing, but there are heavy metals poisoning us as well as pesticides. And for those metals, there are specific substances. So vitamin C plus zinc plus the amino acid methionine will take nickel out of your system. Silica will take aluminium out of your system. Now, not only have we got aluminium as an industrial toxin in our environment, glyphosate, this lethal herbicide, wraps itself round an atom of aluminium and carries it into the brain. Right? So we need silica to get the aluminium out, and we need to eat organic to not be eating glyphosate. And I'll come back to what glyphosate does in a minute. So I said 7 methods. I missed out 2. Colonic hydrotherapy,
which
is really good for some people. I mean, you have to be over 18. It is not a weight loss tool. It is not a substitute for eating plenty of greens and having plenty of exercise. But in some people, it really stimulates the liver to do its thing properly, because the liver gets a lot of its blood supply from the colon. And if that is contaminated with junk and, old stuff lining the walls of the colon that hasn't shifted for 10 years, colonic hydrotherapy can clean that up. It can stimulate the colon to do its job. And it means the blood supply reaching the liver is much purer. And the final thing is sprouting, simply sprouting salad leaves and things like alfalfa, chickpeas, sunflower seeds, and lettuce and cabbage on your window ledge and eating the tiny sprouts. When they're really tiny, they're 50 times richer in nutrients per weight. So a tiny 1-inch sprout of broccoli, 2 centimeter sprout of broccoli, compared to a mature broccoli head, has got 50 times the amount of nutrients per weight. So
That's incredible.
yeah, it is extraordinary, isn't it? So you grow your seedlings partly to turn them into crops, but you also eat some of them raw. Now, you soak the seeds first in filtered water, right? I don't know what it's like in Spain, but in the UK, especially in London, if you don't filter your water, you're drinking residues of pesticides and fertilizers. You're drinking the residues of hormones peed out by women on HRT and the pill. You're drinking the heavy metals and the chlorine, and in some areas, the fluoride. So fit a really good water filter. Use that filtered water to soak your seeds. Add a little bit of liquid zinc or whatever liquid mineral you are lacking. And rather than taking it directly as a supplement, the seedlings will take it up for you, turn it into a naturally bioavailable form, and you eat those seedlings. So that's for detox, but it's also for general nutrition. And you can have salad all the year round, even if you have no garden and you live in a high-rise flat. On your window ledge, you've got your salad growing. So those are the 7 detox methods. But obviously, you then need to avoid retoxing. And that means knowing where the pesticides are in your environment. First and foremost, they're in food. And if you eat organic, you're avoiding 90% of them. But the other 10% is getting to you from other sources. If your local council or local authority is spraying the grass verges to stop the weeds growing, which some do, and some have stopped thanks to wonderful campaigns from Pesticide Action Network, then, you know, your toddlers playing on the grass, they're running around barefoot in glyphosate. So there's a campaign there to stop the local authorities from spraying unnecessarily. To be fair, it's got better since lockdown because they saved money and labour by not doing it. And now trees and wildflowers have grown in those spaces and everyone's realised it's better.
Yeah.
Other huge source of insecticide poisoning is people's pets, because people put flea collars on their dogs and cats, or they take them to the vet who gives them a so-called treatment, and they'll give you the trade name of whatever substance they're using. But then you say, well, is it an insecticide? Oh no, it's just such and such. You look it up, it is an insecticide. And I did this 20 years ago with a cat when my kids were little. I said, when will it be safe for my child to stroke the kitten? Oh, in 48 hours. Well, how long will it keep killing the fleas? Oh, for 3 months. Hang on a minute, I said to the vet. There's no logic there. Either the stuff's gone in 48 hours, in which case it's not killing the fleas, or it's still there, in which case it's going to poison my toddler. So I never had my animals sprayed with any of that stuff. There are natural ways of keeping fleas off your pets, and they're mentioned certainly in my first book, Staying Alive in Toxic Times, and I refer to them in the newer book as well. So yeah, pets are a huge source of pesticides. Now we should talk about what they do in the body.
Yeah, exactly, because it's difficult as well when somebody feels relatively healthy, maybe also because we don't have the comparison of what it would feel like if we didn't live in an environment that was completely filled with toxins. But yeah, I find that it's sometimes difficult to visualize as a relatively healthy person. Okay, but I'm contaminated with pesticides, as is almost every European currently. What is that doing really inside of my body?
First thing is, if you are very well nourished and you have good levels of the good stuff, the pesticides and the heavy metals do you less harm. So good nutrition is the number one protection against this poisoning. But we need to be specific, right? I knew from my practice that people with Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, motor neuron disease, most forms of cancer, endocrine disorders, and infertility are always very, very high in pesticides when you tested them, right? But when I started writing the second book, I thought, well, how am I going to prove this? Are there any studies? And I thought I must find at least half a dozen studies showing the connection. Well, Amelia, I tell you, I was completely overwhelmed because when I started researching, it wasn't a question of can I find half a dozen studies showing this connection. It was which of the tens of thousands of studies am I going to put in the bibliography? It's completely extraordinary. There are tens of thousands of studies from very respectable, pucker, peer-reviewed medical journals, scientific journals, showing that pesticides are very strongly implicated in Parkinson's, in MS, and amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is motor neuron disease, or Lou Gehrig's disease, they call it in America, and in almost every form of cancer. I mean, the World Health Organization classifies glyphosate as a carcinogen, and most of the other pesticides, they come out, they're banned, right? Go back to DDT. They're brought out, they're banned. And the companies say, oh, sorry, we'll go back to the drawing board and make a safer version. 10 years later, that's banned because they all turn out to be toxic. And here's why. Their chemistry is based on nerve gases used in both world wars. Right? Nerve gases were used in both world wars, particularly the Second World War. Come 1945, the manufacturers couldn't sell it. They had no use for the product. So they turned it into initially insecticide, then herbicide, fungicide, pesticide, and so on. It is the same stuff. It is the same stuff, slightly modified, that was used to kill human beings in both world wars, right? These are biological weapons. And yeah, of course, they kill wildlife as well. They kill pests up to a point till they stop working, but they kill the bugs in the gut, and they kill mammals, and they kill other plants, and they kill us. Here is the mechanism. There are several mechanisms, actually, but with the ordinary insecticides and pesticides, they are what's called cholinesterase inhibitors. Right, now stay with me here because I have to explain how nerve transmission works in the body, right? If a message needs to go from the brain to your biceps to move your arm, or from your skin back up to your brain to say, ow, this hurts, it's hot, I shouldn't be touching it. All that nerve transmission works in the following way. So the electrical impulse is generated in the brain, and then it has to cross a synapse. At the point where the impulse crosses a synapse, that means it goes from one nerve cell to another. This is a tiny gap. Electrical impulse can't cross it in the form of an electrical impulse. So at that moment, it turns into a chemical signal. And there is a substance, a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which is created in the synapse, goes across to the cell membrane of the next nerve cell in the chain, and there it triggers another electrical impulse. This all happens in microseconds. Now, when that acetylcholine, that neurotransmitter, has been produced and it's done its job of transmitting the electrical impulse chemically, it has to be destroyed. It has to be removed from the synapse and deconstructed. Otherwise, the system gets stuck in the on mode and paralyzed. The enzyme whose job it is to deconstruct the acetylcholine after it sent its impulse is called acetylcholinesterase. Now, the ASE at the end of the name of an enzyme tells you its job is to break something down when that substance has done its job in the body. So cholinesterase is absolutely vital. So it breaks down the neurotransmitter in that moment. So the system then has a rest. It's called a refractory period. And it's absolutely crucial for the nerve cell to have that microsecond rest. Then it's ready to receive the next signal that is transmitted. Now, what the pesticides do is they destroy the cholinesterase enzyme, whose job is to break down the transmitter to create the rest period so the next batch of transmitter can do its job. So they destroy the cholinesterase enzyme. The system gets stuck in on mode. It cannot rest. And this is one of the major mechanisms. It's not the only one, but it's complicated enough. This is one of the mechanisms leading to neurological deterioration. I've mentioned Parkinson's, MS, motor neuron, but also Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's, which has become a huge epidemic. We've almost forgotten that it's normal for very old people to be compos mentis and active and with it and bright, you know. My dad lived to 95 with all his neurons firing. And that's how it used to be back in history. We did not used to spend the last 10 years of our lives in this miserable twilight of debility and not being with it, right? So we don't need to lose our brains. And one of the reasons we're losing them is these pesticides, which are designed as neurotoxins. So that's one of the things that pesticides do. They have two other major effects. One is they are carcinogenic, and this is well documented. So they're hugely implicated in cancer, which again is an epidemic. We're told 1 in 2 of us would get cancer. When I was growing up as a child with older parents, loads of older people around me, I think one person got cancer, breast cancer, had surgery, no chemo, no radio in those days, and lived into her 90s, having had the illness in her 50s. So firstly, cancer is getting more common. Secondly, it's getting more lethal. And what frightens me most is that we're normalizing this. Everybody's running marathons to raise money for what? For research into a cure. That's brilliant for the pharmaceutical companies. Their research is funded by these very well-meaning charities. The people running the marathons are totally motivated by love, but actually all that's happening is the drug companies are making more profits. We're not getting a cure. What the drug companies don't want you to know is that there is prevention possible, right? You run your marathon, you eat organic, and your chances of staying healthier are much greater. So cancer is the second huge impact after neurological disease. The third is endocrine disruption. Now, the pesticides, some of the molecules have a certain resemblance to estrogen, and they sit on the estrogen receptors in the body, and they trigger estrogen effects. Now, that's an oversimplification, but seems the heavy metals have a similar effect. A lot of heavy metals, aluminium, nickel, mercury, cadmium, they also seem to have an estrogenic effect. So what we're seeing is the feminization of male fish in the rivers, the feminization of male wild animals like deer, massive drop in fertility in mammals, birds, reptiles, fishes, and humans. Now, there's a lovely study from Denmark some time ago comparing sperm counts of organic Danish farmers with non-organic Danish farmers. And it was extraordinary. The organic farmers had excellent sperm counts and healthy children. The non-organic farmers had really worryingly low sperm counts. And sperm counts are dropping all across the Western world, and now not just the Western world. Infertility, so-called unexplained infertility, was one of the commonest things I saw. I worked with couples. You get the nutrition right, you identify and detox the heavy metals and the pesticides. Within a year, they can conceive a healthy baby.
That is incredible, because also, so you've done a lot of work in preconception care, and what I had seen in a study recently as well is that all of these negative impacts and harmful sort of side effects from pesticides are in fact hereditary as well, and that sometimes the second and third generation are still carrying them, even though they might not be the ones that initially consumed them. So how does that work? And
that works because the egg consists of a nucleus, but also cytoplasm, the cell, and these chemicals, if they're in the mother, are in the egg, and therefore they're in the baby, but they also can be adducted, that means stuck on to the DNA. So from both the sperm and the egg, you can get these and many other industrial toxic chemicals literally stuck to the DNA. And that DNA, the genetic material, will be passed to and will determine the health of the offspring. So yes, this is multi-generational damage. And as well as fertility, and that's not just inability to conceive, that's miscarriage and birth defects as well as all that, you've got the endocrine effects on men, which is prostate cancer, and on women, which is everything from severe premenstrual problems to cancer of the endometrium, that's the lining of the womb, and cancer of the ovary, the breast, and the cervix. So all of these and other endocrine disorders, not just cancers, all of this is to do with pesticide poisoning, heavy metal poisoning. and hormonal poisoning, because everyone, as I say, everyone who's taking the pill or HRT is peeing the residue out into the water table. The water companies don't have a procedure for taking that out. So unless you filter your water, you're drinking your next door neighbour's hormone treatment. You're drinking the antibiotics that they are on, or that their pets are on, or that the non-organic farm animals are on. So tip number 1 is eat organic. Tip number 2 is filter your water.
As I'm listening to you, all of these things sound absolutely absurd that they're legally produced and sold.
Exactly.
And I'm so confused as to, first of all, why it's legal that companies are selling us products that are currently killing us and poisoning us. And second of all, as we learn about this and as it becomes more and more well known that these products contain these chemicals, why are we not shifting so much faster to all of the things that you're recommending now?
I mean, that is absolutely the right question, Amelia. The answer in one word is capitalism.
Right.
These things are highly profitable, and these companies have the money to put out their own propaganda combating, our little campaign group saying, hey, it's dangerous. They're putting out all over the net that it's not, it's perfectly safe. However, all the studies that are independently funded show that these things are dangerous. All the studies that are funded by the companies themselves, done by bought scientists who have lost their moral compass, aim to show that there's no damage. Although if you ignore the conclusions and trawl through their data, they do show damage. Right. So one of the commonest questions that people ask, and I address this in the conclusion of my second book, Getting Healthy in Toxic Times, the key question, but surely they wouldn't let these things be sold if they were dangerous for us. Now, who is they? They is the government. And, it's disillusioning to discover the government are not our mummy and daddy. The government are completely hooked in with the companies that make the pesticides and so on, partly because they get tax revenues and partly because a lot of ministers have shares in these companies, like they have shares in pharmaceutical companies. They're not neutral, they're not impartial, they're not benevolent. They just want to get elected and they want the funding to get elected. It took me years to accept this because I couldn't understand it. But there's a lot, in chapter 1 and in the conclusion of this book about how this works. It's called the revolving door. The people who work in the regulatory authorities that are supposed to control and contain these profiteering companies are the same people who have worked for those companies. It's all the same. And therefore, the only people who are going to protect us is ourselves, sadly. The government are not going to do it. They will respond a bit to public pressure, sometimes. But basically, this is profoundly shocking. You can go into a supermarket or a local hardware store and buy Roundup. Roundup has got glyphosate in it. You can spray it on your garden to keep the weeds down, and 10 years later be utterly devastated when your wife is diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and never make the connection. How come it's legal? It's absolutely shocking. But the company that make it, Monsanto Bayer, one of their justifications, which is fascinating, get the science here, they say, but the pathway that glyphosate interferes with in the growing crops, it's called the Shimitake pathway, doesn't exist in mammalian cells. It only exists in plants. Now, technically, that's true, but guess what? It does exist in the bacteria in our gut. And they are like another organ of the body. The microbiome isn't an optional add-on. It's as vital as the liver or the kidneys, right? They are poisoned by glyphosate, therefore we get sick. And Monsanto Bayer have been taken to court numerous times by people who got cancer from contact with their products. And these people win their cases, right? Monsanto keep paying out. And the first one was Dwayne Johnson in California, who was the groundskeeper in a school, right? And he was spraying glyphosate all the time. And he won his case. He got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. But did anyone think, hang on, let's check the health of the school kids? Because if those school kids, God forbid, also got, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma or leukemia, no one's going to make the connection. They're just going to run marathons to raise money. And that's well-meaning, but it doesn't get to the root of the problem. So there's another thing about glyphosate, which is its molecular structure is remarkably similar to that of glycine, an essential amino acid which forms part of many substances, but it particularly forms part of our connective tissue, so tendons, ligaments, and so on. It's so similar that if you have a lot of glyphosate on board, it is perfect. And if you're malnourished because you're not having enough protein, so vegans are most at risk of this, it's perfectly plausible that the glyphosate would replace glycine in the collagen molecule, which is what connective tissue is made of, right? Connective tissue needs collagen for strength. The collagen will not be strong if its glycine has been replaced by glyphosate. Now, nobody's researched it. Who's going to fund that? But it is perfectly biologically plausible. And there's a lot about it in a wonderful book called Toxic Legacy by Dr. Stephanie Seneff. A whole book about what glyphosate is doing to us. If you're not making your own bread from organic flour or buying organic bread, your kids are eating glyphosate.
Yeah, that's crazy. Would the solution be a farming industry and health industry that's completely interconnected?
Yeah.
What would that look like in our society?
We need to come together, and the place we need to start is in schools. Right?
Okay.
We need doctors, health workers, farmers who understand this to offer to go into schools, teach the kids, turn a little patch of the playground into a garden. Kids love it. They love it. And some of the urban kids are astonished to discover that tomatoes don't grow in tins on supermarket shelves, that they grow in the ground. They instinctively love it because it's instinctual for us, isn't it? To get our hands in the earth. So that's where it begins. It begins with campaigning. It begins with writing to our local MP, and it begins with boycotting the junk food industry and boycotting all these petrochemical products like plastic, and teaching the kids that the junk food industry is ripping them off and destroying their health and doesn't care about them, and teaching them the taste of a freshly grown organic tomato. And also just reminding people that the level of illness we're seeing in our society, among kids as well as adults, is not normal, is not natural, and it's not necessary.
It's so nice to have conversations like this one where obviously we know there are so many issues and it is a bit of a depressing topic when you really get into it and realize, but I've loved the fact that there are so many tangible and practical solutions as well that you've shared with us and that we can do, which I find to be the most inspiring element of this conversation. So it's great to have solutions
when you know what the causes are.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, brilliant. Thank you so much, Dr. Jenny, for your time today. It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation.
It's lovely to talk to you, and all power to you for the good work you're doing. All right.
Thank you so much.